Hi, we're Chris and Ashley, and we are a marriage surviving sexual addiction and infidelity. Uh, we have had a lot of comments that have inspired this video. I just basically wanted to kind of go over some things about when Chris and I are not connecting at all or something seems off. I like to go to 3 areas that I check very closely if we are connecting on those levels. And those 3 areas are if we are connecting spiritual, emotional, and physical. Now, that's my order that I check. If we're connecting spiritual first, and that can look like anything, whether you're a faith-based person or not. I mean, spiritual, whether you're, meditation or just some way to disconnect from the world and into something a little, a little bit more powerful, a little bit more higher up, whatever that looks like for you. But for me, my order of importance of connection with my husband is if we're connecting spiritual, if we're connecting emotional, and then if we're connecting physical. I don't necessarily know that that's the order that Chris checks our connection on. If you had to put those 3 in order, what do you think you feel like you do better throughout the week if we're connecting in this way? What order would you put it in?
There's a part of me that doesn't want to say because I don't want to come out here and be like, well, physical's number one. But unfortunately, it is. For me, that's very much my love language. So I feel that through physical connection with Ashley, and so if we're not connecting on that, then I start gravitating towards that. And what happens is if we're not connected spiritually and we're not connected emotionally, then my go-to is, well, like, hug me, hold me, let's just snuggle, these things, trying to bring the physical connection, because for me that's where my...
And this is where we can sometimes have this struggle in our marriage, and where connection can be really, really hard to harness sometimes and keep within our marriage, because that is his, and I know that that's his. I'm so glad that he said, he's like, I don't want to say, I'm so glad that he said
it makes
physical.
me sound like I don't care about her. I don't want to make it seem that's not the truth. It's just that's what I gravitate towards. So we're not connected. Hug me right now.
But see, for me, if we are not connected spiritually or emotionally, I don't really want to connect physically. So this order, these are good questions to ask you and your spouse, because it helps Chris and I see very clearly sometimes when we're having a super off week. We have to find ways to come together on our list of importance, because there are things that I just know that I need to go to physical touch in order to be there with Chris. And that looks like many different things. It doesn't have to just be, straight to the physical thing that he wants. It looks like I touch his leg, I give him a hug, I snuggle up to him, different things that I will go straight to his connection, especially if he comes in and it looks like he's really stressed or having a bad day or whatever. But there are certain times of the year that Chris works all the time. So to connect spiritually and to connect emotionally is really, really difficult to do. So he can walk through the door, and I haven't had those connections fulfilled on my behalf in quite a long time. And so am I starting to want to jump towards the physical connection? Not really. But if he walks through the door and I can tell that he's had a long day and it's been hard and he's stressed and he's this and he's that, then I immediately want to go to his connection and give him an embrace and hug him or touch him or make him feel that love. And I, of course, in return, love it as well. I love that physical connection. I love when he hugs me. I love when he is there for me in all those aspects as well. But those are some of the things that I start off doing. But for me, this so many times on some of our other videos, we had some of the commenters talk about roommates and talk about all these different things. These things start to happen with Chris and I when we're not connecting in these levels. So for spiritual, what that looks like, one of my favorite things to do with Chris is to read scriptures and talk about God. Talk about what that scripture interpreted and what does he think that means, and then us going back and forth or talking about an experience about church or finding some way to talk about God or praying together or whatever it looks like. Those are the ways, some of the quickest ways that I can immediately feel close to Chris and find enjoyment. Then the next thing is emotional. If I'm having a hard time or a bad day or an exciting time or a happy day, the first person I want to tell is Chris. I want to immediately go to him. Now, the super, super vulnerable things, the things that it's like, you know how sometimes you really want your spouse to say this, this, and this, and this to you, or do this for you, or these things, and sometimes it can be embarrassing. Like, sometimes I need to say, like, have him say, like, and he, don't get me wrong, he does an amazing job of this, but, like, sometimes I'll be like, hey, I'm feeling a lot of insecurities in rejection today. This and this and this happened on Facebook or whatever I'm looking at that's, makes me start to feel that rejection. And so I then have to go to Chris and say, hey, this ridiculous thing happened. Somebody loved all my friends' photos but only liked mine. They didn't want to take the extra couple of seconds to press the, little emoji button to make it a heart, and now I feel rejected. Those are embarrassing, vulnerable things to have to go through. And so then even more vulnerable, then I have to say to Chris, listen, I'm feeling really rejected. I need some reassurances from you right now to help me understand that I am not rejected, that I am not somebody that is not worth people's time or attention or something like that. I need this from you right now. That is something that's really hard to do. It's sometimes really hard to go to your spouse and say, here's the things you need, but here's the things I need. But he's not a mind reader. He doesn't know the ridiculous, things that I've come up with in my mind. And so I share that with him. And then even more so, because communication has always been very difficult for Chris, when he comes home to me and he tells me something, like, and it can be just the tiniest thing of, he received work sucks. No, but one time, because that's a typical communication for you. That requires very little.
That's the typical I don't
communication. But the thing that I remember one time he came home and he said something from finding out that some people had a game night and didn't invite him, and he felt rejected. Okay. And that actually made me feel a lot, sorry that I shared that, but that actually made me feel
rejected.
It made me feel a lot closer to him because he was sharing a vulnerable thing that is a little bit harder for him to share. He doesn't normally open up to stuff like that. And so when sharing those things emotionally, we feel a lot closer. And that looks like so many different things. Like, there are lots of times with work and money and providing and things like that, of those things that can come up for him, that when he comes home and talks to me about those things, we are a lot more emotionally connected. We feel a lot closer. And though those things may be lower on his connection base and where he feels like that fulfillment of being connected with me, the best, wouldn't you say the best connections that we have is if we are working towards fulfilling all three of those connections: the spiritual, the emotional, and the physical.
Yeah, I mean, definitely all three of them is the goal. And so it doesn't matter what order you rank them in, they're all important. It's so, again, when I say, okay, physical is at the top, doesn't mean that the other two aren't important. So having all three is obviously the goal, and having all three enhances, each one enhances the other and makes everything better.
Yeah. So. And something that was kind of eye-opening to me the other night, is that because I was much, much older when I discovered this. I've never really had a good role model of what healthy intimacy looks like. And I believe I've said this before, but so I was, I was much, much older and far into my marriage already when I discovered these connections. And there can be a lot of other connections. I'm sure other people will have different things. Those are just the three that we've come up with, that if we're off, it's because we're lacking in one of those areas. That's just what we've come up with. But I was much older when I finally realized, if we're not connecting on any of those levels, then something's missing. And to have true healthy connection, we need all three of those. Mm-hmm. And those are hard to harness. So it's not always going to happen. Every day is not going to be like we're connecting in all three of those areas. It's just really hard to do that. But if it has been a really long time, then we go down that list of checking what area we're missing on those connections. But the other day I had a really eye-opening experience because it's been a few years that I've made this discovery of these are the things that might be lacking. I made the connection of not only do I need to connect with Chris in those three areas, I need to connect with myself in those three areas. So in order to fulfill like a physical connection for him, we were fine physically, spiritually, and emotionally this particular week. But I was still feeling really, really off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I finally realized it's because I'm not connected with myself in those three connections. I hadn't really done a whole lot of spiritual for the day. Physically, I was not doing well. I didn't feel very good. My kids had been really sick, so I hadn't gotten much sleep. I was really, really ran down. And emotionally, I had kind of shut myself off because the other two areas were not super great for me either. So emotionally, I didn't really talk to anybody. I hadn't reached out outside of my home. I basically only talked to my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old that day, which is great. But I didn't really talk to anybody else. I didn't sit down and share them all with all the feelings I was having, and so in all three of those areas with my own self, I was suffering. I was not connected with my own self. And so when it came time to Chris coming home and he was tired and he was exhausted and I could tell that he needed like a physical connection at that moment. He needed a hug. He needed snuggles. He needed whatever it was. And for me, I was sitting there immediately like, oh, I can't do it. And I just kept going through my mind being like, why? Why can't I do that? What is going on? What is wrong? And that was the discovery I made. So we wanted to share this particular part because it's been just very helpful in our marriage to find out why we so often go to a disconnecting place and not understand why. What's happening? Where's it coming from? And when we finally pinpointed these three areas, I feel like
it's eye-opening.
Yeah.
And I'll speak from an addiction standpoint. It's not just it's eye-opening. It's helpful. It's strengthening for us as a couple, but for myself too. Ashley talked about being connected with ourselves on those three things as well. Those are areas where they become like red flags, I guess. Like if I'm not feeling very emotionally connected to myself or spiritually connected to myself, those are red flags to me from an addiction standpoint of, hey, warning, these are things that can put you into a kind of a shame cycle, and that's what the addiction feeds off of. And so it's super helpful, one, to how I can be as a spouse, to how we can be together as a couple, but also individually on how we are with ourselves, and certainly for an addict in trying to avoid those things that will bring us down and bring our marriage down and then lead to not being connected on those things. So
again, mostly why these comments have come up, and we did one other video tonight that I'm just gonna retouch again because I've been hearing it so much lately. I do this, and it's just not enough. And I think from an addiction standpoint, nothing is ever going to be enough. but from a healthy perspective of finding whatever your areas are in your marriage that connects you. When you approach it healthily, it is satisfying. It is fulfilling. It is something that, you will get full off of. And the best way that I can describe this is kind of like a eating analogy. Basically, I could probably have 50 billion packages of Gushers, and it's never, I would just keep eating them. Don't look at me like that. I would just keep eating them because Gushers are good, but they don't ever fill me up. There's plenty of other food I can think of, but I remember, in high school buying lots of boxes and never ever stop eating them, and it never made me full. I never had enough. Whereas I can have a healthy meal that's healthy for my body, and it will literally fill me up and satisfy me, and is good for my body, for my mind, for everything. And I see this in the same way as marriage. For those that are saying, I do this, this, and this, and this, why is it not enough? If it's from an unhealthy perspective, if it's like, I tried this and I tried that and nothing's helping, and it's coming from the addiction standpoint, it's never going to fill the marriage up. But if you find those connections that really truly fill you, not only will it fill you up, but again, same thing, it will be way better for your heart, for your mind, for your marriage, and for everything. And then that is what we'll look forward to constantly, because the thing is, that meal will fill me up, but it fills me up for that night, for that day, for that meal process. And then I want it again. So yes, I still want it, but it's fulfilling as opposed to I'm reaching for more and more and more. So hopefully this helps. We just wanted to do this because of the not being able to pinpoint the connection or the disconnect in so many times that the lulls start to happen. These particular 3 areas are what has truly helped us.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
Thanks.